So hello, I welcome this time all listeners to our Cosmic Matrix podcast. And I have an amazing returning guest back on the show. I think he's been there already 2 or 3 times or 4 times. I remember. It's always a pleasure to have David Whitehead back on the show. So much. I'm very excited to have you on, especially for everything that's happening. And just real quick, for people who are not familiar with work, David is a podcaster, a martial artist, a father, and also definitely a veteran truth warrior. Has been on the front line, I have to say, in the information war for over 2 decades. He also co-hosts unslaved.com. Definitely check that out with the great Michael Tessarion. Also going deep into occult and esoteric topics beyond the politics and all kinds of subjects tying into consciousness studies, history, geopolitics, human's origin, popular symbolism, philosophy, psychology, and much more. He also has a Substack with premium content with many lectures and films he has produced. Definitely check that out as well at his website, dwtruthwarrior.com. I will link it in the notes. He lives in Canada, BC. We'll talk about what's going on over there as well. Welcome to the show, David.
Bernhard, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I love talking to you. So glad to be back. And I'm excited for this show. I feel like so many shows I've had to do, even in the past, we've had to talk about a lot of bad news. And yes. I'm just loving what's going on right now. I know a lot of people are trying to be down about it, but that's cool for them. I'm excited to have a really good, encouraging, positive, and hopefully thought-provoking chat with you today. And I know we're going to do it. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Beautiful. I have to say also on the side note, because I've been also in this quote-unquote game for many, many years. You know, nowadays with social media, you see all these new truth influencers coming out here and there, and some are better than others and all of that. Some people we have lost in the trenches. They're stuck somewhere, right, so to speak. But I really appreciate, because whenever I need some grounded common sense, I check your timeline on X. That's kind of what comes down sometimes, you know, so I really appreciate that. You know, and your common sense is not just balanced, neutral, you know, it's just seeing the bigger picture and being very, you know, also with critical thinking, obviously, and questioning things. But, you know, there's more a healthy optimism in terms of, you know, seeing where we're at compared to where we have been. And I want to point out a recent post you made on X, like a rant type. Sure. And I'm going to just share the first sentence about it, where you wrote, "The reason I suspect many of the anti-Trump blackpillers in this truth movement of being either paid agitprop agents, mentally captured, brutally depressed, or narcissists who are simply only in it for clicks is because they have precisely zero compliments, recognition, or even level 1 gratitude for the absolutely historic, tangible things that the man and the movement has started and accomplished, and is going against the very new world order they are also allegedly battling against." And it's so true. And maybe you can continue about this post, because you made a great comparison going back to 2008, for example, in the time machine, and compared to how things were big then.
Well, I appreciate you resonated with that, Bernhard. I've been really loving your posts as well, and you've been doing a great job breaking this down. I just want to point out to the listeners here, I have to say that voices like Bernhard are rare in this movement right now. So there's very few people that you're going to find that are actually trying to give you some good news. And I find that very interesting. I've always found that interesting. I don't know, Bernhard, is it our personality? I don't know.
That's a good point.
I'm telling people are stuck with me. I've always been the eternal optimist, but I've always realized that you've got to have a dose of logic and reason to go along with it. You can't just be pie in the sky, hopium, jumping on every like, oh, you know, Trump's just going to pour liquid sugar in my mouth and I don't have to do anything. And I just have to sit on my hands and not participate, which is the accusation of people that are supportive of what the man is doing and are excited about what's happening. So we're not that. That's not what I've ever advocated. I'm not here to tell people that Trump and the team are some kind of saviors that are going to fix everything for you. But I mean, gosh darn it, can you deny that they're off to a pretty good start within, what has it been, like 3 weeks already? Some things that, and what I was saying in that post, I was venting because people that I respect, people that I know, friends of mine are literally losing their shit right now. And I went, this is the time you're losing your shit. Like I lost my shit a long time ago. This has been a long war. And you just have to become comfortable being uncomfortable and being uncertain, and that we're really just looking at a mystery that none of us know everything about. So if we're all looking at the same data, okay, well, maybe some people are missing some data. There's that. But if we're generally always we're looking at the same perspective here, we forget history. We forget just how far we've come. And this was my rant. And I came up with the time machine example because I was thinking back to myself in 2008 when I started my YouTube channel, right? Right before I started my YouTube channel, for about 4 years before that, I had been going on a very private awakening journey to what's been going on in Canada, in the politics, 9/11. I went down so many paths of awakening to at least the possibility at that time that what I was being told by the media and the people around me was not wholly true, and that there was other information that you could get access to show that a lot of what we've been getting told by the media is false.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, as this positive, excited person that I am naturally, I'm like, oh, I'll just go tell all my friends, guys, didn't you see Building 7? Like, it must be something else going on. They kind of lied, like, and now they're in Iraq. What's that? Isn't that crazy? And I couldn't believe the levels of resistance I got. And then I would find out about something to do with the Federal Reserve. I'm like, guys, they've been ripping off those Americans over there with that Federal Reserve. And I mean, I just found out that in Canada, our government actually sold our dollar and our banking to the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland in like 1974. And I just spoke to Paul Hellyer, Canada's former deputy prime minister, and he said he was there when it happened. He was trying to warn Canadians about the effects of that. And
Yeah.
and nobody wants to hear that. And they're like, oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. And so to wrap it up, I realized that back in that time, this information was ahead of its time. And I didn't realize that there's actually a resistance mechanism built in to a lot of people. I think due to trauma, I think due to the level of propaganda they're exposed to, that they're resistant to good news. They're resistant to the awakening process, and they're resistant to facts. And I went, wow, I love this. I don't know why everybody else around me is just terrified to even look at this information. And so in that post, I was just saying, guys, if you've been in this truth movement, trying to wake people up to try to save your countries, right? And you've been doing this for a long enough time, think back to like that 2008. If I got on a time machine and I went back and I told these guys back then, all the truthers back then, hey, bros, listen, this guy, you're never going to guess who it is, by the way, but there's a guy that's going to get into the American presidency that is going to, on day one of his first term, going to start going after the fake CIA Mockingbird media that you guys have been trying to expose to like 10 people, because you didn't really have many people to talk to about this stuff back then. So, your little followings and the little books that you can put together, you have no idea how that's going to pay off down the road. Like with this guy coming in, exposing this stuff, he's going to be the first one to not start a new war. I mean, that's kind of a first in American history. And he's also going to be the first one to broker historic peace treaties between nations that have been battling for each other for like decades. And he's going to be the first one to get in and start openly starting this conversation about human trafficking and fraud and corruption in the government, and the issues with why our children are so sick, and we really got to look into that. And guess what? He's going to bring in RFK. They're going to try to kill him, and he's going to survive by literally turning his head like a nano degree. And then he decides to double down and bring in RFK to go take on Big Pharma. And then he's like, screw that. We're going down and we're going to go audit the Federal Reserve and the IRS and the Pentagon. Let me go call my buddy Ron Paul and bring his ass in here. And I could keep going. And I listed a bunch of things in that thread, even the fact that, it was only under Trump that Epstein was arrested. Only under his administration did that even happen. And when that happened, it started the most viral worldwide conversation and mass freakout about this issue that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so if I was talking to my bros in 2008, I'd be like, all that Ted Gunderson stuff we've been trying to share, talking about all the satanic networks and the abuse and the child trafficking and all that. Yeah. I know that's a hard subject to break, boys, and you probably got two people that want to hear about it right now. but just wait. It's going to literally become the national and international conversation of the time under this president.
Yeah.
They would be like, what? And he's going to go into the Fed and he's going to go in and do this private investigative committee to take all the corruption out of government. They would not believe me, Bernhard.
Yeah.
I might as well bring an iPhone back to the Middle Ages. Like that's where we were at back then. You know what I'm saying?
No,
so
but
I'm just trying to, what I love that you started with that part of that post, because that was my main point.
Yeah.
Is that we don't have to agree or like everything about Trump and whatever's going on. But like, for the love of God, the dear black pillars, I've got some questions about you, because here's the issue I have. Even if I were to go halfway and say, hey, yeah, we should absolutely be cautious about these things that you're finding and we should look into them, even though every time I look into them, I keep finding straw mans. But anyways, let's be aware that we shouldn't just be blindly trusting anybody. If I'm able to meet you halfway, why the fuck are you not able to meet me halfway and give credit where it's bloody due? Why not? Why can't you do that? Why are you incapable of even giving one point of gratitude for one amazing event that, again, look at it outside of just Trump and what's going on. This is something affecting human consciousness right now. Yeah. Even the fact that these things are happening and these debates are happening is upgrading the conversation in people's minds. It is upgrading their awareness. It is part of this awakening process. So when you're not pointing those things out and at least showing the glasses half full, maybe sometimes, I don't know, once a week, once a month, could you do one just to say, hey, it looks kind of dark over here, but there's some sun rays over here. There's some good things happening. People are learning about these things like in a way they've never learned before. Nobody knew election fraud was this deep and wide. Nobody in Canada knew our country was so freaking incompetent and corrupt and that we basically aren't a serious sovereign country. We're now finally having that conversation. Nobody understood in Canada why the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms didn't work during the lockdowns. And now we can finally talk about it. Isn't that positive? Should I keep going? We could be here all day, brother. So that was what was inspiring that tweet.
No, thank you. Very well said. And you made a very important point, because sometimes when I bring this up as well, we're not buying into hopium. We're not into new age love and light. No, I love everybody. It's beautiful. We don't believe that Trump is just going to arrest everybody on day, all these kind of things. It's just ridiculous. And there are so many strawman arguments on top of it, of what people then believe, what we think. And we have had an episode like almost a year or 2 years ago about being blackpilled, and now it has become more prevalent. And I want to get your quote unquote definition, what you see is being blackpilled, because I've seen a lot of people claim, including a very popular female quote unquote influencer, truth seeker, researcher, claiming that calling other people blackpilled is almost a psyop, so to speak, to avoid facing uncomfortable truths, right? Almost like a CIA operation. And this is absolute nonsense, because we both agree that being blackpilled doesn't mean that you don't question what's going on, right? And all these things. So what is your definition of being blackpilled?
Sure. Yeah. And it's a valid question, because I've been at this a while. You've been at this a while. And I trust me, if people have been watching my work for any period of time, we talk about the dark, uncomfortable information to a level that I'm sure the person that you're talking about has literally no idea how deep that rabbit hole goes. Okay. Yeah. I have always personally been totally fine going in and staring at some very dark information, and I've been able to keep my mind rather sane and calm during that. That took me a long time to get to that point. Maybe I've become desensitized a little bit over time, but I think that's normal when you're doing this work, combating evil. And if you want to get into the roots of evil, the beautiful thing about it that I think the blackpilling types forget, which we can define as I answer this, is that there's a positive side to the process of looking into that darkness. Yeah. But the thing that is missed is they think that the only way that you're going to fix things is by looking at the events and the other people. That the only way you're going to fix the problems going on with this level of evil that we're seeing and this being exposed right now is by externally looking at them and analyzing and taking a magnifying glass and going in and digging it out. That's only half the story. I'm not negating that side. I do that side myself. I go in, we go through events, we look at receipts, we get into the data, right? But is that where you're going to find a solution? And if you're only doing that, and that is the only thing you're presenting to your audience, what are you setting them up for? You're setting them up for suicidal thoughts is what you're doing. You're not giving them anything other than, hey, let's just keep looking down into the abyss. The other issue is that we have a problem with fact checking in this movement. Okay, let's be honest. I'm not talking about setting up some kind of Pointer Institute bullshit to fact check everybody. I just mean you should be fact checking yourself, right? Everybody that's a journalist or claiming to be, and going, all right, when you're presenting information, you should present both sides of the story at the very least. There may even be more dimensions to the story, but you should at least present both sides. You should, like I said, you can show people negative information, but you're doing damage if you drop it there. Like if I just go, hey, Bernhard, they're sacrificing children to some ancient god or something. And they're like, what? And then I walk out of the room and then people are like, what are you doing? That to me, that's insidious. You have to really, if you're trying to do this in good faith, and if you have a positive outcome for the people that are going to listen to you as a journalist, okay, you have to become an expert at being able to share bad news alongside the good news. You must do that. Even as a researcher, you should not just be going and dwelling in the abyss of, the history of ancient cults or, the infiltration of the Federal Reserve and what happened on 9/11 and how many children got bombed yesterday. Like if that's where your consciousness is sitting all day, every day, you are going to start to become what you hate. It's like that old statement. I think it was Nietzsche or something. Be careful staring into the abyss because the abyss is staring right back at you, right? Or in Lord of the Rings when they're going through the smog and they're trying to get to the towers, right? And they see the dead faces in the water of the lost battles, and they said, "Don't look into the faces; they'll pull you in." Right? So be careful, and that's a metaphor for when you're looking at the horrors of the past, which you must do. That's another side of that Lord of the Rings metaphor. You must confront and face the evil. But careful going too much; it's going to pull you in and drown you, right? So that's a black pillar, is someone that leaves you hanging and then is incapable of seeing any level of positivity in what's going on. And also you got to start looking at a worldview. When I look at certain people out there and the way they report, you start to get an idea of the patterns of how they research and you understand when they've formulated their little theory of because this is what we all do. And good, we need these variations. I'm not here to say don't do that, but my disagreement is these people make these theories, they jump to conclusions based on this information. There's gaps in their information on certain subjects, right? And I'm just saying that objectively because I've just seen a lot. I've been around a while and I've interviewed some really brilliant minds that could bring sides to those stories that would blow your mind and give you a totally different context of that information. Missing context, we could do a whole rant on that as well, but I think people know what I'm talking about. And so when you're doing that and you're not showing people, hey, did you realize that there's another dimension to this story that maybe you haven't considered? It could also be this. Like we could look at the same data and then draw slightly different angled conclusions on it. That's what detectives do. You have to go through what they call the apophatic method of eliminating the untrue to let the truth be revealed. Now, if it turns out that truth is just horrible and ugly and nobody wants to look at it, I am in no way, shape, or form arguing that we should water that down or lie to people just to keep them hopeful. Like you should obviously share whatever the facts are. But it gets to a worldview and a psychological level when it's obvious to anybody out there that there are both positive and negative forces operating in this universe. Okay. It would have to be so, or otherwise the universe wouldn't exist. All right. Like you need electricity and you also need magnetism. You need masculine and you need feminine. You need up and you need down. Right. So if you're going to tell me that our entire universe, our entire galaxy, our entire planet is just run by pure, unadulterated evil, and that there is no way to combat that because it's extra dimensional and it's aliens and it's reptilians, shapeshifters, and it's this. Not saying that shit isn't real to a certain degree, but now you're even ascribing to that domain pure, unadulterated evil intention upon everything happening in our world. So if you and I exist as people that are, I would say, good and well-meaning, and we're trying to do our best, right, for humanity and in our lives, then that's evidence alone that there is good in the world. And that's another great, I love this Lord of the Rings metaphor because it's fitting beautifully. That was one of the things that Samwise Gamgee had to tell Frodo when Frodo was at his wit's end trying to bring this ring to Mount Doom, is he's like, you remember those old stories, Mr. Frodo, those ones that meant something, right?
Yeah.
And that what those stories told you of these gallant journeys and all these things, these horrors that these brave heroes needed to see and experience, was that the point of those stories was that there's good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
Yes.
The point of those stories, black pillars, is not to say, let's go look at Sauron and glorify him and put him on a level that makes him omnipotent, indestructible, completely all-powerful, and we're putting evil up on this pedestal. Who benefits from that?
Yeah.
Who benefits from that? Unless they tell you the other story. Oh, wait. Yeah, I know we're outnumbered and we're outgunned. I know we're up against an absolute monolith here. But you are here. And it just takes a few. It just takes a fellowship. It just takes a committed group of people working against evil to expose it. And then it will undo itself, right? Yeah. The other thing I'll leave you with this is another statement from Tolkien. Man, he's coming up today, where he said about evil. He said about the nature of evil. It was either Tolkien or it was C.S. Lewis. They would probably both agree on this either way, where he was saying,
they're hanging out anyway.
They're buddies anyway. Exactly. There's even black pillars telling me that they're Illuminati agents. Can you believe this? These people are so retarded. They don't read the quality of the work. They don't understand the method, and that was pulled the message, and it was pulled from thousands of years of mythology that crafted all of your religions. By the way, they looked at the same archive and they came up with these brilliant metaphorical stories to tell you deep-seated truths, and you're going to tell me these guys are Illuminati agents? I don't know what's wrong with you. So, because if you can't recognize wisdom, I can't help you. Yeah. But anyways, one thing that this is, and you tell me, it doesn't matter if Barney the dinosaur said this or if Tolkien said this. Evil can't of its own create anything. Yeah. It must steal the work of good men. Yeah. And repackage it and give it back to you. Yeah. That's how evil works. What does that tell you? That doesn't tell you the whole system is so evil and rotten and corrupt from its core. Everything is evil. Everybody's so evil. No, you know what it tells you? It tells you evil, little man syndrome pirates captured something good men created. And then they repackaged it, turned it upside down, inverted it, and sold it back to you, which they don't have creative capacity. They're stupid. They're dumb. That's the problem, because they're psychopaths. They don't have empathy. If you don't have empathy, you don't have the ability to create. So you need to find the people that do have empathy, that do create things, and you need to warp them and turn them against the other natural order. That's the only way that the little man can do that, right? Yeah. And that's who's running the world. That's what they did. But what does that tell you? That doesn't tell you they're monolithic and all evil and all powerful. That tells you it's a straw man. They're fakers. They're pretenders. They're like that. They're just like, they're little Gollum, like they're nothing. They're little, right? Compared to the good. So the good is actually stronger. It's just that there's will involved and it gets complicated. I don't want to keep ranting.
No.
That's my thing about black pillars, man, is that they have an inability to see the facts of reality as they are, which is that it is both good and evil happening here. It's not just evil.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Great. A lot to unpack there. I want to comment on. Beautiful. Number one, we all have been there. I can see myself in the black pillar, right? I've been down into the darkness, definitely, deep down. And it's nothing even compared to what most people talk about on X anyway, right? You know that. But you can get lost there. And you made a really good point, because if you don't have a strong psychospiritual foundation, and you know my work, I go more into the inner work, right? Not to lose your center, stay to self, whatever God, divine, whatever it means to you, be aware of your projections, your shadow, your own shit, basically, so you don't project it into the world, or it will pollute your research to begin with because of your projections, right? But I can also see if people, and I've seen this in myself, you're in the dark for too long, you create unconsciously a negative bias, meaning you only look for that. We all have biases. I think it's more important to admit that we all have biases. None of us are enlightened, have objective, omniscient knowledge. Sure. Be aware of your bias. But I think most of the extreme black pill people are not aware of their negative bias, right? So they just look for what they want to see, right? I mean, the classical, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So if they're in a negative state of mind, they're on depression, because in your rant, you made some good points. Some of the people I truly believe from a psychological perspective are deeply traumatized, depressed, maybe suffering from PTSD, what happened over the past 4 years, especially newbies, so to speak, right? Yeah. And almost understandable, because we've been so lied to, so gaslit, then all of a sudden your trauma response is not to trust anyone. There's a trap everywhere, right? Yeah. It's kind of that kind of response. That's the one thing. But you also hit the nail on the head with the creativity aspect at the end, what you shared. It reminded me of the work of Paul Levy, right, about Wetiko, that kind of the mind virus that infects people, that creates like a counterfeit version that hijacks our creativity. And that's how I see how actually the black pill, especially very popular ones who see psyops everywhere, Trump is controlled up, this controlled up, RFK, all of that complete negative bias, work in the favor of the forces they claim to expose. Because how they hijack, because they lack creativity. You can see even from a psychospiritual perspective, other beings, whatnot, whatever the matrix forces are, they want to hijack our creativity, so we create their desired reality through us, right? And not to get into like oversimplified new age thing and all of that, but there's still truth to you create your own reality based on what you focus on, what your vision is, what you dream up, and all this. We have an effect on reality because all is one. The inner is not separate from the outer world, right? So it's not about denying the dark. That's a new age approach, like, oh, dark doesn't exist, it's just all love and light. That's a complete distortion. But really be mindful and aware how your own creativity is being hijacked when you see yourself only talking about negativity without really seeing what the good that is actually also happening. And another big thing is, you made also a good point, they also try to instill us that these evil forces are more powerful than we actually are. That's the whole point. They're trying to seem like you can never beat them, as if it's completely useless. There's always this trap and that trap. It's very disempowering. It's almost like a victim blame consciousness. Not even understanding from a bigger picture perspective that here's the thing actually, that evil by itself, darkness cannot exist by itself. It can never win. That's right. This is almost Sri Aurobindo talked about the false duality between dark and light. Yeah, there's a quote unquote duality on some level, but ultimately it's just all God, all one, right? And then we have the unconscious, the ignorance and evil forces and whatnot, but they cannot exist by themselves, right? Only you need a light to have a shadow. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So ultimately, that's why also we see on the bigger picture that always, in beautiful novels and films like Lord of the Rings and others, ultimately the light will win. Ultimately, God will win. Ultimately, the good forces will win. We still have to play our part, obviously, in all of it, but don't lose your focus. Don't get dragged into this black hole where you don't see anything good anymore. And I think for anybody listening, you have to check yourself. What is your focus every day? Like you said, what do you really focus on? Are you constantly worried, feared, and trying to expose this and that and this and that, which is like an endless game, endless digging, to always expose, quote unquote. And like you rightly said, we forget, why are we actually doing that? What's the goal? What's your intention? What is a true awakening? Right? So an awakening is not just exposing dark, it's also bringing down of who we truly are and seeing the positive developments. And another thing which I recently posted, what I've seen a lot, just to hand this over to you, and I can see this in myself too in the past, there's this arrogance and ignorance of truthers almost claiming to know how an awakening should look like, what exactly needs to be exposed in order to be awakened. And then if, a certain public person doesn't say, insert, whatever popular topic you want to be exposed, then he or she is controlled up, cannot be trusted, right? The classical, like, oh, if he doesn't talk about Zionism, cannot be trusted. Oh, there's a picture of him with Netanyahu. Oh, like, look at them, Most of them are guilt by association fallacies anyway and all of that. Yeah. But it's really, as if we, that's the humility check, right? That there are things happening we don't have no control of. And like you said, good things are happening. And I think another negative bias, which I had as well, is what I see in the black pill community. They cannot acknowledge that good things can happen within government, right? People are so anti-government, and I was their anarchist, anti-statism. Anybody who votes as government is a matrix agent. No change can happen through the system. I've been all there, right? But he had to eat humble cakes. No, hold on. That's not how reality works. This oversimplified black and white. This is not how God works, right? There's there's good forces within government, and everybody is imperfect like we are. There's definitely hardcore psychopaths and all of that. We know that. But that's why you have to have a certain strategy and infiltrate almost the deep state. And I think this is exactly what Trump and his team are doing on their level with their intentions, right? And so it's to see the subtleties, the nuance, and I think that's what's missing, really.
Oh, well said. Yeah, you covered lots of good stuff there. And I would just add that, that Percy Shelley quote, the British poet, said, when all men are good and wise, government will of itself decay. Mm-hmm. Not before. Mm-hmm. Okay. When all men are good and wise. Do you see a bunch of good and wise people running around the world? I don't.
Yeah.
Okay, I see a few here and there. All right. But in mass, the masses are still under mass hypnosis and mass formation, right? Because they're sources of information, and this is agreed upon by all the pillars, whatever pill you take, is that, the masses have been dumbed down and brainwashed, and they're being targeted with very sophisticated propaganda weapons and payloads, right? So we understand that.
Yeah.
So that's why you've got to have some system of governance. Okay. You have to have a system of governance because there are people that don't agree with your worldview that want you and everything you have. And they think might makes right. And they're going to come and steal your shit and take advantage of your society and rape and render if they're allowed to. Okay.
Yeah.
So you need some system of checks and balances. You need a system of law. And the thing is that what people forget when they're like, the government is corrupt, government of its own is corrupt, the banks are corrupt, everything's corrupt. What makes up those things that you've just described? Human beings with consciousnesses, right? So then they're like, well, this system would be the commies are like, the communist system would be the best. Okay, let's do a test run. In fact, let's do like 300 test runs. 100% failure rate with 100 million body count. Yeah, bad ideas. Let's move on. No, we just got to find the right.
We haven't done it right.
So, right? Well, if you put me in power, I'll get the communist experiment right. Yeah, right. Sure, buddy. Sure. And then you got all these the anarchists. No, I was going to make everything private. We got to do all these things. Look, there's probably a correct answer for the best way to put it all together that we don't even know yet. All right. But no matter what you do, you're still going to bump up against the problem of consciousness. This is why my colleague, Michael Tessarian, is why I work with him. He was the one that said, if you want to know my main message to the world, it's don't leave consciousness at the door. This is why. And when he said that, I didn't understand it. It took me years to understand it. And now I understand.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just because of listening to him. It was listening to the references that he kept putting in front of me that were like mind-blowing. And so I realized, okay, this is the missing piece in a lot of people's research. They're stuck on the events. They're stuck at the political level only. They're not analyzing that from a psychological perspective. And therefore they are missing 90% of the context in order to understand how this all works.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about context, this is important. An event can happen in front of you, and you can see it from one perspective, and your neighbor up the road can see the same event. Maybe it's a car accident, okay? Or some kid gets hit chasing a ball or something. And I see it from one angle, he sees it from another angle. We both come to different conclusions as we witness the event. We go talk to the investigative officer that shows up and is taking, what happened? I say this is what happened. The other guy didn't see because the car was in the way. So he says this happened. Now the investigator has two conflicting reports of the same event, okay? What does that investigator have to do? Does he simultaneously believe two contradicting stories, or does he have to start investigating to realize all the factors and the context and the nuance underneath those stories to finally where all the truth is here, right? Either one of us was right and the other was wrong, or maybe both of us were missing something and we both got it wrong. So that's just a very simple entry point to help give you an understanding of where people go wrong in researching this information. Yeah. I made the mistake. I probably still make this mistake. if you're not admitting that this is probably the easiest mistake to make, you're just being dishonest intellectually. And so that's why I always come back to, keep pulling up all your little factoids that you're going to bring in. But the issue is now we have different facts. Now,
Yeah.
I have the facts that I've gathered. You have the facts that you've gathered. We put them together. They completely contradict each other. We're looking at the same events. We've looked at the same data. We've reached different conclusions on the data. Who's right? Well, the only thing a person can do, somebody listening right now that is determining, hey, is this Dave guy worth trusting with my mind? Like, is he right? Is Bernhard right? Is, Jake Shields right? Is Candace Owens right? Is David Icke right? Is like, who's right? Is Klaus Schwab right? Like, this is why forget about thinking that you're going to nail it all by yourself. It's impossible. One mind can't hold it all. So all you can do is do your best to get your hands around as much of the information as possible. Go listen to all these people and hear them out. And then you've got to do something that I think 0.000000001% of the human population is capable of or willing to do, which is to go and painstakingly verify all of these talking points and all of these facts and all of these digs and all these things that people come out and go, did you know this? Look at this picture with Trump and Epstein. Did you know? And you don't know the backstory. You don't understand what's going on. And you go, all right, how can you get an average person that's already confused, that's just waking up to any of this, to suddenly jump into this movement and see us all fighting over these very big subjects? And then they're going to sit there and go, this is more of a shit show than the mainstream media. At least the mainstream media and the government press has their shit together and they sound professional and they're out there, consistent on what they're saying. Yeah. That sounds more like truth to me than this craziness that's all about groupthink and hating on Jews and hating on Christians and hating on liberals and hating on and everybody's just tearing each other to bits over all this stuff. Meanwhile, the predatory force that we're all supposed to be analyzing is sitting there just like counting the money in the back, right? This is great, man. Nobody's fighting me. They're all fighting each other. And so the average normie waking up is going to go, get me the hell away from some alternative truth movement. They're a bunch of wackos. And you know what? I'm with you. It is loaded with a bunch of wackos. Yeah. But it wasn't always so. See, and you know what I'm talking about, Bernard. I grew up in the golden age of the truth community when it was starting out. That's the best time for all movements. It's like when you were the first one to go watch Star Wars before it became a circus. You know what I mean? Or like, I remember that where you're like, oh, well, this is a cool movie. And then suddenly it's like a cultural phenomenon for decades and people are getting married at Star Wars events. I was there before it was cool. All right. You want to get into Pizzagate and all that kind of stuff? I was looking at this stuff, reading Maury Terry and Ted Gunderson before Liz Crokin and QAnon or any of that shit ever happened. Okay. Yeah. Before Snowden even existed, before any of those guys. So that's the thing. Like now that I've all I can do is share my experience witnessing friends of mine adopt a particular, a particular package deal in their mind. This is what Ayn Rand used to call it, a package deal, where you look at one piece of information, some YouTube video comes across with a guy explaining something. Maybe they see some Santos Bonacci video or something, and they're like, oh, that guy sounds like he's making sense. That's pretty cool. Yeah. And then you find out the guy's a straight psychopath later, right? Yeah. So, like if you had to have had your time in to get that intuitive knowledge, like a detective that's been working for 40 years on murder mysteries versus the new jock that just graduated detective school. And then the new jock is the one that thinks he's the new shit and he knows better than the 40-year-old veteran. You don't, right? So, and I'm just saying that, like, you have to also go to the original days with the original research that was all about, it wasn't about ideology. I studied just as many liberal guys as I did conservative guys that were exposing this. I studied people from all like religious perspectives, new age, atheist. Like I've got friends in all those circles because I just look for quality and competence. That's all I care about. And I don't wholeheartedly agree with a one person, and I don't think it ever should be like that. So I remember when it was very much about participating in it, and it was about, hey, this is what I dug up. What did you find? Oh, interesting. I didn't hear about the that theory of 9/11. I didn't know about that.
That was kind of like the Anons, right? When Q was up, that's what they were doing on 4chan, 8chan, right?
And that's why that movement, I'm going to say, was a breath of fresh air in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes, it turned into a circus, and it's a bit of a circus now. But the original, anybody that was there in that Q research community, again, it's separate from what anybody thinks about Q and the person posting.
Yeah.
What I was impressed was the movement and the traction it gained on the particular subjects that it was centered around.
Yeah, and they would
I
do
was
the
already
research.
independently.
People don't understand. People think like, oh, Q was just feeding. No, he was just asking questions. We'll talk about Q more in the second hour for sure, going deeper. But I'm saying like the annals they were doing legit research and comparing notes, like you said, right? And
that's right. And many of those anons, Bernhard, were people like me who had like already 10, 15 years of research independently in this field under our belt. Yeah. So don't think that like they just recruited a bunch of 13-year-olds living in their mom's basement to go and like start trolling people on the internet. Like that's not what it was. Yeah. That's also not what the original truth movement was in America and in the West and in Canada. It wasn't the way it is now. It wasn't like this. This is why I say I grew up in the golden age of truth research. And it gave me a sense like these people were more balanced. They weren't extremists. Okay. The researchers that I grew up with, like Ted Gunderson and all these guys, and Jim Mars and
Jim Mars, I remember him.
So many guys that they're hitting different parts of this, right?
Yeah.
They were just more balanced people. Like I met them and I hung out with them, and they were normal. They had families. They had Saturday night game night with their kids. Like they were normal, but they worked in these crazy fields. They had this experience, and they just had a knack for digging, and they exposed a lot of things. And when I saw that there was very extreme camps being set up in this movement, I went, oh, okay, we're getting hit right now. We're getting hit. So you want to talk about Operation Trust and infiltration? Yeah, I can tell you all about it. And I've got the names, dates, and addresses. We just, we'll be careful with that right now. But
exactly.
The thing is that we were like, doesn't that make sense? That an organic movement of people that started paying attention to the corruption in government, media, and the corporate world started to go, wait, we should start researching and sharing what we know to the public. That's when the censorship algorithms started to come in. That's when people started disappearing. That's when videos started disappearing. You could go on YouTube and watch anything you wanted and get like basically a PhD in this shit back in like the early 2000s, right? Mid 2000s. Now, what can you do on YouTube? You can't even like fart on YouTube or something. Like you're going to get taken down. So we've been through, I'm going this long way because I just like the missing context here is that the research community never used to be this divided. We used to be cool with different theories. We used to actually be excited when the new theory dropped. It'd be like, hey, because we all knew the data and we were all like, oh, some guy has a totally new angle on it. That's how I found Michael Tsarian. Was that I was researching the whole ancient human origin stuff. And I found the Atlantis theory, and I was reading every Atlantis theory that existed, right? And then it was Jordan Maxwell I was listening to, and he mentioned Michael's name, and then I saw a little clip of him at a conspiracy con in like 2003, giving a little thing on Atlantis and the Queen of England, and I was like, who's this guy? That's a different take. I've never heard this take before. And we used to get excited about it, and then I go, who's this other guy? He's got a totally different take on it. Who's Richard Hoagland? What does he think? Like, and it used to be like you're shopping for perspectives on the same information. Now it's what team are you on? What team are you on? Like, are you on this team that believes all of these very specific things? If not, you're an Illuminati shill. You're an agent. You're this. You're that.
You don't believe the Earth is flat?
Just to add the end at this, and I'll give it to you, is that when they call me black pill, they call me traitor or whatever, I've got so many more names to throw back because of the time that I've spent in this field and what I've witnessed. And let me just say, what we're getting today, guys, in the top levels of the big channels and the big names in this movement is kindergarten level shit compared to what we used to get.
True.
So I'm just trying to make that old stuff great again.
Thank you, man. No, excellent points. One of the most important points you mentioned in the beginning, what Michael Tsarian said, right? Don't leave consciousness at the door. And what I see happening nowadays, so there's truthers, even older truthers, that's why my work, I'm so big on self-work. What I mean by self-work, I just meaning having also basic understanding of psychology, you know, and even spirituality, your own psyche, understanding the basics of your own projections, triggers, how that I mentioned before can pollute your research, and understanding the psychology of humanity, right? That also an awakening doesn't happen just by information alone, right? Some of us are maybe more gifted who can research and all of that. It requires a certain intelligence, a certain detachment, a certain emotional intelligence as well. But at the same time, especially nowadays, the issue is with, compared to the old days, nowadays social media, right? And short attention span and all of this, and sound bites, information sound bites, and a lot of truthers or people who spread all kinds of information, like you mentioned in your rant, you know what I mean? There's something good happens, and within seconds it's being debunked because of just some, you know, they make conclusions so fast without any research. It's just like it's like an NPC program, literally, right? Like the truther NPC type. That's what I see it, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. Truther NPCs.
That's what's happening, and there's no. It's very automated, a very automated program, and they just, you know, repeat memes and all of that. Everybody says the same things, right? And losing the bigger picture and not understanding, you know, the nuance and the subtleties in it all. And, you know, from my perspective, some people shouldn't even be going down the rabbit hole. It makes things worse for them, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm sorry, kind of like I agree with Jordan Peterson in this case, you know, before you start criticizing the world, you know, clean up your own room, so to speak. How's your own life? You know, your emotional, psychological, spiritual health, your physical health, your life, you know, everything, you know. I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but you have to take your whole inner being into consideration, everything, and see everything holistically, and be aware of psychological laws, spiritual laws, right? And everything, the evolution of consciousness, the higher picture, what I call the spiritual vision. Doesn't mean that I'm enlightened, but having understanding of occult laws, spiritual laws in the sense of how our inner state affects the outer world, right? Levels of consciousness. And what you mentioned too, I've gotten big into the work of David Hawkins over the past few years and his map of consciousness. And basically from scientifically proven different levels of consciousness, and that we see the world through our levels of consciousness. That's like you shared in your example, and people forget that, right? That's why I realize when I'm trying to people kind of describe the way I see things from the high perspective, some people just do not get it because they're kind of stuck in the tunnel vision of just this or that, it's good or bad, this very oversimplified black and white thinking. And when you have more, you know, high levels of consciousness, and I'm not saying that I'm all big and I have my days and all of that, I'm not enlightened by any means, but the more you're in the game and the more you work on yourself, or some people, I feel like you also naturally have a more nuanced view. Like it is not this fixed view that this is that and this is that. There's a natural, like almost like a non-linear approach, right? And not this very fixed linear approach which most people get stuck in and then project their own shit onto it, right? So just to bring it down, I think what is missing is just psychological education, right, about themselves and the world, right? And then also understanding how the evolution of consciousness, there are bigger cycles happening. I'm sure you're aware of, you know, like my wife, Laura, she is big into evolutionary astrology. There are bigger cycles happening, karmic cycles, right? There are evolutionary forces which we're all subjected to, which the mind cannot even grasp. I think as a truth seeker, we need to also acknowledge the limitations of the mind, right? Yeah. That you never get fixated on something and you like, let's see how this plays out, you know, before making any conclusions. Even the minute Trump came in, like all the blackpillers, technocracy, Elon and Trump, they're going to push in the technocracy. Everybody's getting microchipped and all of this extreme fixed view instead of like, hold on, let's just wait and see, right? So,
well, and that's funny you bring that up because there's two ways to react to that possibility, because we could all admit we don't know for sure. At the end of the day, this could be the most complicated conspiracy of all time. Like we don't, you know, maybe some of the black pillars are right. Like I'm willing to entertain that in my mind. I'm willing to see that maybe I've been deceived, or maybe we've all been deceived. We're just trying to figure out which way we've been, you know. I'm willing to admit this. I'm not afraid of failing on that front or being wrong. I come from the martial art world where you battle test everything, and that's how you find out what's right and what's wrong. You don't just keep your theory in your head that you wrote on a whiteboard that you dreamt up after a party one night and that's just your working philosophy for the rest of your life that never changes, like that's not the way to go.
Yeah.
How do you achieve knowledge of anything? You also have to, like, right now, it's not a time to be all wishy-washy either. You kind of got to choose where you're going to
Good
be
point.
orienting your mind,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're in the fog of a psychological information war.
Yeah.
And we're in the psychospiritual side of it that you point to, the bigger meta level, as well as what's going on. And we forget that, like, just, how I love the way Matt Walsh brought that whole "what is a woman" question into the debate
Yeah.
about the trans thing. It's such a good use of logic and how powerful it is, because look, that's coming down. And so it took our society just a little bit too long to finally settle that one. But we found out, okay, we now know what a woman is. All right. That we went through that hurdle. What's the next question? Well, I've been saying the next question is, what is a government? What is a country? Like, Canada has to be asking this question right now as we're being turned into the 51st state. And I think maybe the deal's already done. We can talk about that. But the next would be, what is truth? What is the nature of truth? What is consciousness? What are you?
Good
right?
questions.
This goes to the metaphysics anyway.
Good questions.
So, and the reason, I know someone like you is going to understand what I'm about to say, and mostly your listeners also, is that this is how I see it. In the Christian perspective, they would say the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Right.
The good Lord works through people in all places, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
The hand of God is behind the scenes, right? Always thwarting the wiles of the devil. The hand of God is behind people that don't even know. Like, I grew up with this stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And those are truisms that transcend any one religion. Those are just facts.
Exactly.
Of and I think those facts, you can name it what you want. You can dress it up how you want. You can put any costume you want on it. You can name whatever. But in the end, we're talking about something that I think we can all see with our inner eye, which is that there is a force behind what we see in the physical light spectrum.
Yes.
Okay. And you're evidence of it. If you've ever seen a corpse of a dead body, there's no light there. There's no consciousness there, right? The consciousness has left that vehicle, right? But what was that vehicle when the consciousness was there animating that vehicle? Mm-hmm. What was that force that lit up their eyes and gave them the access to the computer system of the human brain and mind? What was that? Yeah. That's the question. We got to pull up some Rupert Sheldrake and some great thinkers to really get into that. But either way, and we can speak a common language. Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, New Age people. Like, everybody knows what I'm talking about. Maybe you name it differently. I don't really care. It's a fact that something like that is there behind us that is a mystery to us. Consciousness is a mystery. It's a mystery to science, and it's a mystery to the mystics, and it's a mystery to everybody. All right. Yeah. And we don't like mystery, Bernhard. This is where we keep getting trapped in our own mental prisons. Plato's cave, okay, is that we freaking hate not knowing. I hate not knowing. You hate not knowing. Let's just admit it. And there's a positive to that, because it drives you with this force of curiosity to go try to solve the mystery. Yeah. But here's the thing. That mystery of consciousness might just be something that we don't get to know about right now. And so we're going to have to be content with it being a mystery. But leaving that aside, the reason I bring this up is that if we believe consciousness and God and the force works like that, then when we see evidence of people doing things that are in best interest of humanity, in the best interest of their nations, in the best interest of the good, and it might even come from people that you would never suspect. Like I said, if I went back in that time machine and I told my 2008 truther buddies who it was that won the presidency and started doing these things, they'd be like, "Who? What? Who did this? No. The guy that ran the show on television?" Like, they wouldn't. It wouldn't even compute, right? Yeah. Or Elon Musk is starting to fight for free speech. Isn't he the guy trying to turn us all into robots? The guy who's behind PayPal. What are you talking about? I mean, how dare he wear the Diablo vest? I mean, he must be a Luciferian.
Oh, they don't know. Like, on that note, people think he's a Luciferian. It's just the vest from his computer game resembling one of the characters, right? It's a computer character.
He's a nerd. What do you want? Yeah. He's an autistic nerd. But and some people might even think he's wearing a mask. I mean, he might even be the real. Who knows? Who knows? But anyways, no matter what. Okay. The will of God could work through George Soros without him even knowing
That's
about it.
exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Trudeau.
Yeah.
Look at him right now.
Yeah.
I just we got I'll save this
Okay.
one. I'm gonna save this
yeah,
one.
we dive.
Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean, Bernhard? Do you have
Yeah.
any comments on this idea that like the Lord works through
Yes,
mysterious
absolutely.
ways,
I mean,
mysterious people?
that's the thing when you come into high levels of consciousness, you realize the oneness of it all. I'm not talking the new age thing, we all one is all love. No, that God expresses himself for everything. Like reminds me of Sri Aurobindo's, he was imprisoned in solitary confinement in India because he was a nationalist. He organized uprisings. You know, he was a political activist before his work and his enlightenment. He was imprisoned by the English 1 year solitary confinement in 1910 or so, in the early 1900s. And then he just started his own yoga, his own practice, and he had enlightening experiences at the sentencing. He saw Krishna, he saw God in all. Like all of a sudden God spoke to him, I have organized this all through you. I'm in the judge, I'm in the prosecutor, I'm in the defender. I'm all. I'm playing this game, this lila, like the Maya, for your work to be ready, right? So this is almost the quote unquote mind fuck, right? That quote unquote evil is also an expression of the divine, the dark side, right? The yin and the yang. And God works through everything. And Sri Aurobindo has a big part of my work, getting this to a better understanding that he got, like you said, he even said his own words, the divine uses any human as his instrument, despite their distortions, for whatever lesson needs to be learned. You, me, I, Trump, everyone. But it's not, it's not a perfect instrument because we still live in the ignorance, as he would say, right? There's all the distortions. So it's this whole game we're playing and we still need to participate. Like I've been lately getting into the Gita, amazing book, right? Where Arjuna has a moral dilemma with the war and like why to engage in war and fighting, right? And then he has his companion Krishna, which is very similar origin story to Jesus, by the way, on the side note, just as you know. But Krishna's on the side note, no, you must fight, right? You must take a position and engage in the play, right? Yeah. And even kill if necessary, right? It's not it's about pacifism, but you act without attachment to outcome, without being attached to defeat or success. It doesn't matter, but with intention to the divine, to your higher good, to your higher self, whatever it may mean to you, right? But engage we must. And so that's really to have an understanding of this bigger picture that yes, the God is working in mysterious ways, absolutely. But we have been so divorced from his spirituality. We live in the dark ages in this materialistic universe, right? And most people have lost their connection to that. They're hijacked by dogmatic religion, right? Or completely lost their inner connection. And like you rightly said, so we are afraid of the mystery. You are afraid of the unknown. And then that's why people grasp to certain absolutist ideas of really being attached to a certain view because they would be terrified not to know. It's like a survival mechanism. I need to know exactly what's going on, right? And then they grasp on certain information that is also a reflection of their own fears and insecurity. That's where the bias comes in, right? So
yeah, that's it. No, well done. And then that becomes their anchor.
Exactly.
Psychologically,
Yeah.
called
That
the
comes the foundation,
anchor.
and that's it, right? And then that's
there's
the TDS,
nothing.
but
Yeah.
And then you have automatic when you have this fixed view. A lot of weak-minded people, I'm sorry, have this weak view, oh, Trump is a Luciferian, deceiver. Like this is now the basis for everything else. So this becomes the lens to see through everything, right? Yeah. So you have a negative bias. You cannot even acknowledge anything good. That's the TDS syndrome. And now you have the Musk derangement syndrome and all these other ones. You cannot stay detached anymore. And like you said, that detached mind is necessary to do research. Like, oh, this is happening. So let's see how this plays out and all these things, right?
But that would take courage, Bernhard. It would take courage to have that final,
yes.
right? It takes courage to be able to say, all right, I've got a basic framework of understanding. Yeah. I've got my theory about what's happening. I'm going to go with it. And if it doesn't turn out to pan out, I'm okay with that. And I'll pick myself up and I'll go at it and I'll do it again and I'll refine myself through the process. People don't do this.
You have to be okay with being wrong, though. This is the trap, right?
And that's what I mean about courage. Yeah,
exactly.
It takes courage to be wrong and to be okay with it. And that, this is why I love everybody gets super like, up in your face, like so confident about where they're, it's like, it's too much. It's
Yeah.
overkill. It's
Yeah.
way too much confidence, which tells me you
Good
doubt
point.
yourself. That's why you need the confidence in, I don't know, flat earth or whatever other thing you
Yeah.
need to just attach your entire identity and existence
Exactly. Yeah.
to drink the Kool-Aid and be like, I am now this, and that's the end. Like
Yeah.
that tells me you're riddled with fear and anxiety. I don't blame you for it. I don't have any problem with, I just want to help you, man. It's like, it's kind of like, this whole thing about transing kids and all these people that are confused. I don't doubt that these kids are confused. I don't
Yeah.
doubt that there's people that have confusion and anxiety and they're probably getting bullied a lot and they're traumatized. But this isn't the way to help them. Entertaining delusions is not the way to help deluded people. So, I want to help. The spirit of empathy is there, but I just disagree with the solution. It's the same with this. And this idea of having courage, this comes from the warrior tradition. And that's why I was feeling like when I entered this field years ago, I'm like, well, who am I? I'm not a genius. I don't have I'm not like a whistleblower. I didn't work in government. I don't have that. So what do I have to offer this community like that's any different? And I realized it was this warrior tradition that I had grown up with, and the martial arts was the unique angle of how I could look at things. And so I spent a great deal of my life studying past the surface level of the martial arts and went into the philosophy and the roots and found just gems of wisdom that the religious world missed, the scientific world missed, the political world missed from the warrior ethos. And I went, wow, that's what I'm going to bring. And one of the main tenets is this mindset of courage and vitality and what virtue really is, right? Virtue is not just passively accepting what you're told, repeating it, and then fighting for a cause that you have no idea what you're involved in. That's not really courage. That's just you virtue signaling and trying to pretend that you're greater than you are. Yeah. True courage is facing reality.
Yes.
That's courage. You're facing the facts of reality, your reality of the state you're in, and the reality of the world around you, and the reality of what's going on right now in human consciousness. That takes courage. And also it takes courage to face the mystery. And that's the biggest lesson I got from the warrior tradition. And that's why I walk lightly on my feet with this. And that's why I'm fine with investing myself in certain ideas, advocating for certain theories and perspectives, sometimes simply to see what the reaction is, to gain better data on how consciousness functions with this. And I honestly, my theories are built off of bouncing it off of everybody's heads and then seeing what the resonance response is and saying, okay, for some reason, everybody has an immediate knee-jerk reaction to this particular view. Why? And then I get curious and I go, why don't you like this perspective?
It's kind of like you're sparring your new moves, right?
Yeah. and then I get their feedback and I hear their debate and I'm like, so I'm sitting there taking notes and going, that's interesting. I don't know what is true about that subject yet, but I know the reaction coming from this person is giving me psychological insight as to their motivations and drives as to why they believe what they believe. So I just start there. I used to do this when like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and salespeople would show up at my door trying to convince me of something. I would play along. I would advocate a totally opposite perspective just to gain insight and go, okay, I'm taking notes. And I learned so much from that, not studying directly always the religion, the idea, the sales pitch, whatever, but studying the person delivering it. Holy shit, are you going to have your eyes open as to who's selling you snake oil and who isn't? And you can start to get a bullshit detector at a level that you've never had before, where you're not just looking at the surface level of things.
Yes.
You're looking beyond the surface to see what is real. And when you do that, you learn a lot more about what's real in yourself and the lie mechanisms that I've built up in my own mind to protect certain things about myself. And then I've learned a lot about that. And when you go through, this is why I like your work, Bernhard, because you constantly focus people back on their inward selves and where they're at. That's such a brilliant thing because, and I do the same. We do it on Unslaved as well. And it's because that's the cause of the problems. That's the cause and the solution to the problems. Like I said about the country thing, you can set up any system you want. You can write any constitution you want. And by the way, we definitely need to reform constitutions for sure. But if consciousness in humanity is not geared to enforce that, then we're going to have corruption. If people allow those rules and checks and balances to be broken, then we will have corruption
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
We will have tyranny. So it must, no matter what way we go, we must always face this consciousness barrier in humanity in general. Everywhere we go, there we are getting in our own way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just evil reptilian overlords we got to worry about. They're the least of my concern.
Yeah.
My concern is, where's the state of mind in the consciousness of the masses? Where's the mass public mind at? And that's where you're going to get a gauge on where things are going. And that's why I've been really buying into more of the real deep astrology stuff. And I'm not talking about the pie in the sky bullshit. I'm talking about, it's funny how we say pie in the sky, by the way. But I get into like the people that see astrology as a symbolic representation of mapping consciousness. When you map consciousness, then it makes sense with the symbolism and the 12 and the movements and the planets and how events are influenced. And now those things make more sense to me. And it is that they are trying to use that science, that is the most ancient science ever, to try to analyze where consciousness is at and where time is at. And that's how they're able to predict things. And they're predicting much bigger movements than some Trump presidency or something else. They're effects of a bigger cause. And that's why when I look at some of this stuff and I put all my research experience and my intuition into it, that's why I'm positive about things. And that's why I see these things as positive moves, is because this is well beyond a certain man or a certain country or beyond this or certain that. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. That's the evolutionary forces. Absolutely. Man, we could go on and on, especially in the first hour. So I want to now take a little break and then go deep in the second hour and talk about how you put everything to the test, especially with regards to, I want to talk to you about what's going on in Canada, right? With, as Trump even recently said, with Governor Trudeau. And, and interesting putting your theories to the test, because I remember like a few weeks ago, you attracted a lot of attention on X, some attacks, but a lot of support, for suggesting that if Canada joining US might not be a bad idea, right? And then also the rising Canadian patriotism, which is kind of weird. It's almost like you guys have a crisis of identity, I've noticed, right? And all of that. So let's talk about that. I want also then go into definitely Q. I want to revisit Q. There's Q and there's Anons. There's no QAnon, just to be clear. And, because some of the drops, as you mentioned, have become relevant again, very interesting, like future proofs past, so to speak. There have been a lot of distortions in the group, in this movement as well. We know about that, but let's look at it objectively. And if we have time, I want to also look a little bit, and we touched upon, I guess, in a recent other podcast, but the so-called woke right, as James Lindsay coined it, right? So maybe what's going on there, and wherever it takes us. Again, everybody, I highly recommend checking out David's work. You can find all his links on his website, dwtruthwarrior.com. I put the link into the show notes, and follow him on X for sure. And anybody who's not member of the second hour for the Cosmic Medics podcast, you can go to my website, sign up at veilofreality.com/membership, and then have access to over 140 episodes as well. And with that being said, thank you so much, David, and we'll be right back.